So recently I've been doing some fashion shoots out here in LA with a local photographer that I got linked up with. And I have one coming out today, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to break down that project for you. So I'm going to break down not only the cinematography and how we achieved this look and some of the inspiration that led to this look, but I'm also going to break down the color process and how I used CinePrint16 to color grade this commercial. So let's take a look at the commercial real quick, and then we'll hop into the breakdown.
Are they rebelling against anything?
Sure. What are you rebelling against?
Ugly clothing.
Ugly?
So yeah, it's a pretty quick 30-second spot. The main source of inspiration for this were these reference images that the photographer and director sent over to me. So as you can see, it's really a front lit look and a lot of hard light. And that's kind of typical for a lot of beauty fashion lighting. It can be very flattering if you have like a really frontal hard light. Our main inspiration was actually this image on the left here. And we kind of liked the really high fashion, like urban look. The challenge that we're dealing with is that we are shooting an exterior location during the day. When you're doing stills, you can bring like a really high powered strobe and overpower the sun pretty easily. But in the continuous lighting world with video, it becomes a bigger challenge and you need a lot of output and a lot of power. We didn't have a big crew. We didn't really have the ability to bring out big lights or generators. So the solution that I kind of came up with was to use an Aperture 300X with a spotlight mount. The benefits of that light setup were that A, it's battery powered, and B, it's bicolor. We wanted to have a warm light on our subject and kind of knock the background down a little cooler. And so having a bicolor light allowed us to really dial that in. Here's a little bit of behind the scenes footage. As you can see, we just attached 300X to a monopod, and that way it was really mobile and we could kind of position it freely without being in the way and without having to move a heavy stand. Big shout out to my buddy Dietrich Cook. He was not only the editor of this project, but he also came out and held the light for us, which was a huge help. So the best way to achieve this look was A, to have a lot of output from our light, and B, to shoot in shade. So we picked this street corner that kind of had a New York kind of look to it. And then in camera, I'm setting the white balance at like 3800, and that's making all of the ambient level feel really cool. And then when we bring in our spotlight, it looks really warm and luscious, and it just really makes the subject pop against the background. One of the key techniques here is setting your ambient exposure. I was shooting at around a T28 or a T4 and at ISO 800. And for a day exterior, that means I need to knock down a lot of level. So I generally had a pretty strong ND in like a 2.1 or a 1.8. So we're really knocking the ambient level down. And really, this is like a pretty key aspect of cinematography that I think some people don't really realize, which is setting your ambient level or setting your background level and then lighting from there. I get a lot of questions about how I do this setup, my YouTube setup, and really it's the exact same philosophy. I'm adding some ND in front of the lens, and I'm also white balancing around 3200, so it's knocking the background down and it's cooling it down, and then I'm bringing in a warm key, which is bringing me up to that key level. And that's a really good way to get like really interesting cinematic results, is knock your background down, add in some lights, let your subject move through those lights. It looks really cool. So that's kind of the general philosophy that we came into the day with. And now let's take a look at a couple shots and see how that turns out. So for example, in this shot, we had the model up against the wall, and I instructed, Dietrich, the guy with the light, to stay really flat against the wall so we get a nice defined circle of light, and that it also stays pretty frontal on the subject. And as you can see, it's just really making our subject pop against the background, and there's a nice color contrast and exposure contrast. We'd also play with moving the light, moving the subject, moving the camera, just getting a combination of movement and little moments that we could throw together in what we knew would be a fast-paced edit. We also flipped around and looked towards kind of the skyline, and I really like this look. You get some of the hard light in the background on the buildings, and you get some shadow. And then you also get a really cool like circle of light that's just hitting the subject, from chest up. And I do think it's kind of a surreal look, which is really cool for this sort of high fashion scenario. We pretty much just shot on this one street corner, but we tried to get as many looks as possible, as many moments as possible, and then also tried to just capture a lot of little detail shots of cars passing by, buildings, or just rolling the camera and kind of moving it around while we're changing setups. Like any of those little details could be used in the edit, and as you'll see, there are a few of those shots that actually made the cut. We also did some mixed media type stuff. We had a DV camera. Camera-wise, I shot this on my red Komodo. It was all handheld with the Easy Rig, and I used my DZO 20-55. I purposely chose that lens because it's parfocal, it's a really nice focal range, and it also allows me to be quick and capture some in-camera zooms. I also used a Tokina 11-16 to capture some wider shots, and that actually ended up being pretty useful. Both of those lenses are pretty sharp, pretty modern lenses, but of course we can always soften it up, dirty it up in post. So let's talk a little bit about the edit and the color grade. All right, back with some coffee, let's do it. So like I mentioned earlier, we brought in a buddy of mine to do the edit on this, and we kind of just let him go crazy, and he came up with some really cool stuff, kind of incorporating this like found footage aspect at the beginning, which I don't know how he found this clip, but it like really works perfectly to set up the rest of the spot. So after he locked the edit, he passed it back over to me to do color, and this is where I used a power grade that I've talked about on this channel before called CinePrint16. I do want to say at some point I'm going to do a video of comparing CinePrint to some other power grades and other workflows. It's not the only power grade I use, or it's not the only workflow I use, but you know, in certain instances it works super well, and I think this is one of them. So I used this shot right here as the first shot to kind of build the look on, and the reason I chose this is because it has a lot of highlights, a lot of shadows, and it's kind of the most dynamic shot out of the set. So I'm gonna reset the power grade, and we can start from scratch here and kind of see how we can build this look. So first I can kind of show you what this looks like as Rec 709, and as you can see, it's obviously way cleaner, and I think that we can push this a lot further. So what I'll do is apply CinePrint16 version 2, and the first step, of course, is to change our input color space to the correct color spacing gamma. The first thing I'm actually going to do, though, is kind of set in the texture parameters to how I want them. Right out of the gate, this is looking a little too blurry for me, so I'm actually just going to pull away the blur effect, and then also play with some of the grain texture to get it looking how I like it. So right now we're looking at the Cineon look. I'll go ahead and toggle that off and turn on print film. I'm also going to enable the neon suppression matrix and the vintage tabs. And what I think I'll do is something I've done before, which is kind of dial in a little bit of each of these. So we'll go 0.5 on print film, and we'll go 0.5 on Cineon as well. I'm also going to enable the gamut limiter and the high soft nodes. Also out of the gate, this is looking a little magenta to me, so I'm gonna pull some green in the camera white balance node. And then I'm also gonna go down to our post contrast and start playing with the pivot and just kind of dial in our levels a little bit more specifically. In the grade primaries, I'll also pull it a little bit more warm. And then we'll also add in a circular mask here and soften it up quite a bit. And we'll just use that to kind of pull down the edges of the frame and really draw the eye in towards the center. I'm also going to add in a qualifier node here towards the end and just select some of the skin tone. And then we'll just take a look at this on the vector scope, and yeah, it's definitely falling towards kind of like a yellow-green tone, so I'll go ahead and pull that a little bit back towards kind of more of a magenta, and then we may just drop the saturation overall. And yeah, that's getting us pretty close to the look we had before. So we can start applying that grade to some other clips and then making adjustments as needed. If you want to learn more about CinePrint, definitely check out my previous video on the subject, but one thing I really like about it is it's actually pretty quick to dial in an interesting look. I was able to grade this entire spot, which is like 30 or 40 clips in like under an hour, so pretty efficient workflow. So after I finished grading, I just exported all of these as ProRes Quad 4, and I sent them back to the editor, and he did his final effects and titles and all of that, and then we sent it off. Let me know in the comments below if you like this style of video. I think it's pretty useful to just kind of break down how we go from a concept to a final product. So yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.